Okay. Hello there. I hope you can hear me. So, today we are going to be breezing on through the 1950s. So, the 1950s are essentially what you guys read in chapter 35 of the textbook. So, I'm not going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time here. But really, what we're going to do today is just set up the political side of the Cold War and then transition over to what's going on at home, which is really, for our purposes today, the early steps of the civil rights movement. We're not going to spend much time on the beat movement or suburbia or the middle class or highways, things like that, because that's covered in pretty good detail in the chapter I had you guys read, which you should have finished reading by last Friday. Anyways, I just got back from the National History Day competition where our very own Andrew Franklin just took home third place for the entire state of Maine. So that is pretty darn impressive. And he may even end up going to nationals down in DC over the summer, but that is pretty cool and pretty impressive. After the AP exam, I'll let him show you guys. I'll give him like five to 10 minutes to show you what his project was. It's pretty exciting. As you could guess, it's about a rocket scientist. So, anyways, let's get going. Welcome to the Cold War. So, the key point for today, and really the entirety of Unit 8, is that America is engaging in the Cold War, with the Soviet Union. That is the USSR, which stands for United Soviet Socialist Republics. Republics with an S. It's made up of other countries besides just Russia, such as Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, Lithuania, so on and so forth, Kazakhstan. You get the gist. So, anyways, the the USSR, if you recall, is founded with the collapse of the old Tsarist regime in Russia during the Russian Revolution in the midst of World War I. Now, our capitalist system, our democratic system, is completely opposed to the authoritarian communist system of the Soviets, which we'll get to those differences in a little bit. But the key things we want to do as the United States during the Cold War is, number one, we want to stop the spread of communism around the world, be it through military force or be it through social, social capital. We don't want the Soviets to dominate in something as simple as chess. Ever heard of Bobby Fischer or seen that movie with Tobey Maguire? Or the Miracle on Ice, or the space race. We are competing with the Soviets in every possible facet that humans can compete with each other. Additionally, America, thinking all the way back to Woodrow Wilson, guys, in his 10 points following the end of World War I, the basis of American foreign policy to this day is that we firmly believe that if we keep open free trade and freedom of navigation around the world, it will usher in more world peace and that people will get along and make more money and be super duper happy. So, moving on from this, the Cold War, what does it mean? It's just a term for whenever two groups are in conflict, but they're not actually physically fighting with each other. If they're physically fighting with each other, then that becomes a hot war. Hence why it's like the Cold War versus never like a hot war. It's not World War III. So, just so you know. So, very briefly, I'll move my little face out of the way here so you can see. I've just got this listed here. I'm not even going to talk about this really. You can pause it and take a look at this if you want. Essentially, just know that America is trying to stop the spread of communism. The USSR wants to spread communism around the world. There's not many communist countries. They want there to be more. They feel all alone. Again, we've kind of talked about these terms ad nauseum, so you may pause and write down these terms, these definitions, if you so choose. However, I am not going to spend any time here. All right, I'll move my face back down there. So, just something I want to point out to you guys. This is a little chart of the leaders of both the United States and the USSR. So this is a real good illustration of the difference between a democratic system, such as the United States, where we have new leaders all the time because we're electing new leaders in free and fair elections, versus in the Soviet Union, where in America we have 10, if I did my math right, different presidents during the Cold War. In the Soviet Union, they have 5. And in China, which is even more authoritarian than the Soviet Union, they only have 2. Mao Zedong, not Zedong, and then Deng Xiaoping. I am not up to date on my Mandarin. Sorry about that. So, speaking about the end of the 40s, not even into the 50s yet, this is where we start to see that trust, which had been built up during World War II as allies fighting the Germans, and even later the Japanese, between the Soviets and the Americans, just collapses and fizzles away. You can pause and look at this if you so choose. So, a really important vocab for the entirety of the Cold War to understand is containment theory. Containment theory is the foundational bedrock of the United States' actions on the global stage during the Cold War. We want to contain communism to where it is already located on the world map and not allow it to spread around the rest of the world. This is going to directly lead the United States of America into 2 brutal wars. Number 1 will be the Korean War, and number 2 is going to be the Vietnam War. Because that also ties into the domino theory. You know, like dominoes where one falls, then the other will fall. We firmly believe that if we allow nations to start becoming communist, even if it's what the people of those countries want, it's going to have a domino effect. And before we know it, we are going to be surrounded by a sea of communist countries all hell-bent on destroying our way of life. This is the view at the time. If you ever heard of Henry Kissinger, he just recently died 3 years ago. He was really important in that idea of domino theory, where if we allow other countries to switch to communism, and then eventually we'll be swamped. So, but post-World War II, the United States takes several steps to kind of try to tie other countries to us and make us look like the cool kids on the block compared to the Soviet Union. The first is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So America is the only major country to come out of World War II unscratched. In fact, we come out of World War II better than we went into it, which is unheard of for a global conflict like that. So what we do is we set this fund up where we are going, like, basically giving loans. Kind of think of it like a New Deal to the world. So like how FDR had his New Deal to help Americans, giving them like super easy, like low interest loans, helping them out, all these programs. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is the New Deal on a global scale. Now, this is going to directly connect to the Marshall Plan, which will come up in a moment. But the IMF is still around today. It is super, super important. They give lots of loans to developing countries, and they are incredibly important to world economics. So, in 1947, just 2 years after we meet the Soviet armies at the Elbe in Germany, we love each other, we're best friends, there's this famous statement, this call for containment. Their, meaning the Russians, their neurotic view of world affairs is a manifestation of the instinctive Russian sense of insecurity. As a result, the Soviets are deeply suspicious of all other nations and believe that their security can only be found in the destruction of other powers. So this is going to be widely published across the country and widely lauded across the country. Lauded meaning people are big fans of it. So if the Soviets see this, now they're already scared that we have a nuke and they don't. And then they see this and they think, oh my God, the Americans are coming for us. This will encourage them to speed up the production of their own atomic bombs program, which they will get in 1949, I want to say. But, however, in George Kennan's defense, does this not seem exactly what the Russians are doing today in Ukraine, that they feel everybody's out to get them, even though they are not, and therefore they feel they have to go and attack other countries to defend themselves. I mean, that's a whole other argument, and I'm oversimplifying a very complex problem of today, but if there was some kind of a question like that, and if you were to connect it to the war in Ukraine today, that could get you complexity points on a DBQ or an LEQ because you're connecting it outside of the time scale. So just something to think about. So this guy right here is Harry Truman. He is the vice president under FDR. FDR dies of polio, and then Truman replaces him. Truman will then be elected again to be president. He's widely considered a successful president. So the Truman Doctrine comes just after this call for containment, where the United States publicly says, we are going to protect the world from communism, and any country that wishes to fight back, so to speak, against the communists around the world, we will help you. So if we think back to the Monroe Doctrine, where we're saying no other country can interfere in the Americas, this is essentially being applied at a global scale now. So we are ramping up the Monroe Doctrine massively. However, obviously this is in line with FDR's philosophy. Remember his quarantine speech, that famous speech he gives before World War II, where he's like, hey, we gotta halt these expansionist fascist powers around the globe using American power and might if need be. Now, obviously the Soviets are pretty scared by this and pretty mad, and the trust is just breaking down even further. So, what the heck do the Soviets do? The Soviets set up the Iron Curtain. Now, this is a dramatic term. There is not an iron wall going across Europe. However, it is quite metaphorically true. So post-World War II, if you remember reading in your chapter, Europe is split between West and East. In the East, it is under Soviet control. In the West is under the Allied control. So in blue here are American allies, and red are Soviet allies by force, really. They don't really get a choice. But this thick black line right here marks the Iron Curtain. So Winston Churchill, that Prime Minister of England, is visiting the United States. I believe he's down in Mississippi or Louisiana. And he gives this speech where he says, an Iron Curtain has descended across Europe. So what this means is that behind the Iron Curtain, that the people of Eastern Europe are seen to be literally suffering under the authoritarian regime of Joseph Stalin, under the Russian boot, so to speak. People are not allowed to go east to west. It's very militarized, and it's it's not exactly the same, but you could think of it kind of like the border with North Korea, where it's like these ideals of liberalism and democracy and freedom just end. They die at that border, and then it's a whole different kind of world. Now, I'm simplifying here, but you got this in your chapter that you read. So, and this is not yet the Berlin blockade or the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall is only erected in the 1960s. This is a political cartoon, so I think you can tell which side this person is on, because here's the Iron Curtain, made in Moscow, hammer and sickle. You see that it's crushing people, and then this is a Soviet saying, don't fence me in, obviously meant to portray that he is the one who put up the Iron Curtain, so it's basically calling the Russians hypocrites and that they are being foolish. So, a year after this, we get the Marshall Plan. Again, a continuation of the Truman Doctrine. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but the Marshall Plan is a lot like it's like the Truman Doctrine and the International Monetary Fund, focusing on Europe. So Europe has always been America's primary focus. It's where all the other richest countries on earth, besides Japan and China, are, and Korea. And we have a lot of cultural similarities with many European countries. So post World War II, Europe's obviously devastated. Now, what we don't want are all of these people who just lost everything in the war to fall to fall prey, so to speak, to the promises of communists and communism. So what we decide to do is, again, just like we had the New Deal at home, this is again a continuation of a New Deal in Europe. We are going to give Western European countries money, and we're going to build up their armies. We're going to place our armies there. We're going to help them out, build them back up so they can be staunch military allies who will fight with us if we do go to war with the Soviets. We want people to trade with so we can continue to make money. And we want to show to the world that, hey, if you're an American friend, it comes with benefits. The Soviets can't do this because they don't have money to do this. But if you're our friend, we'll give you all this money. We'll be your best friends. We're buying friends, basically. So this will, again, I know it's a lot going at you right now. You probably have heard about NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO is the military alliance we formed in the post-war years in 1948. NATO did not have a ton of members at first, only 12. Today it has expanded to 32. So NATO is incredibly important because NATO is the foundation upon which the American world order has been built. There's a term that you may see floating around called Pax Americana. That is a play on words from the old Latin phrase Pax Romana. Essentially what that means is, in the Roman Empire, they went out, they conquered, and then there was this massive era of peace and stability. Pax Americana means that same peace and stability, but in the modern day, thanks to the United States of America and the American Empire. Because let's face it, we are an empire. We are, quite frankly. That's not even a political statement by me. That's just we are. We fit the bill of empire. We talked about this in the Spanish-American War and the build-up. By this point in our history, we are an empire, and we are an empire today. We're a different kind of empire than the British and the French were, but we are an empire. This is just a map of NATO during the Cold War. You've got it over here, and then you'll see over here to the east, or to the right, we have NATO today. It has expanded massively into the east of Europe because all of these countries in Eastern Europe are terrified of Russia. And then Russia creates the problems they fear by attacking countries like Ukraine. Again, you got this Berlin blockade in your chapter. All I'm going to say, Berlin blockade showcases that we have the will to stand up to the Soviets. That's all I'm going to say. You could pause that and read it if you want, but you got this in your chapter. So, sorry, we're now on to the 50s finally. If you know this guy, that is Elvis Presley. Thank you very much. So, what the heck's going on in the 50s? Number one, you've got the Cold War's kind of ratcheting up. It's going to peak in the 1960s and the early 1970s, but then it's going to go way, way down with the Entente, but it's building up to that peak in the 1960s. We're also going to see a bit of the civil rights movement. Going to pre-warn you, if you've ever heard of Emmett Till, you're going to see a graphic photo coming up, and there's going to be some upsetting racial language. I apologize ahead of time. You can skip through it if you want to. I'm not going to use the racial language, quite obviously, but it's going to be there on your screen. Additionally, and something I'm not going to touch on really, is the rise of mass culture in suburbia. You got that in your chapter, which you read. So, again, I'm not talking about the baby boomers. You got this in your chapter. If you want to pause, you can pause and then look at this and take down notes. But all you need to know, after World War II, America has the highest birth rate of almost any country at all time. We're wealthy. And veterans are coming home. They haven't seen their wives in a long time. They're making babies, quite frankly. So the baby boomer generation comes from this surge in babies, the baby boom. So you see on this chart the skyrocketing amount of babies being had because the economy is doing so well. When the economy is doing well, people have kids because they can afford them. It's part of one of the reasons why the birth rate's dropping today is because it's so much harder and harder to afford having children. And of course, the more simple and the more human reason is, like I just said, veterans are coming home. They haven't seen their wives in a while. They're making babies. Fact of life. I'm not going to touch on suburbia. I'm literally skipping through this because you read it. You can pause it and look at that if you want to. You read this in your chapter. You may pause and look at this if you want to. You read this in your chapter. You also got the Red Scare in your chapter. I'm not talking about this at all. You may pause and look at this if you so choose. I'll give you a moment. Okay. You also got this in your chapter. You may pause and look at this and read this if you want. But I am not, like, everything you got or you would need to get, you got from your chapter. That is Senator McCarthy, by the way. Terrible human being. Awful guy. Terrible, terrible. But one thing I want to point out is with the Red Scare, this is called the second Red Scare. The first Red Scare was back during World War I, if you recall, with the Espionage and Sedition Acts. Okay, so the only other thing I'll mention on mass culture is that with the rise of the Cold War, it no longer becomes popular, or it's like, culture becomes homogenized. People start acting the same because they live in the same areas, in the same kind of homes. They go to the same churches. They watch the same TV shows. They listen to the same radio shows. They listen to the same newspapers. And in a time when stepping out of line can get you accused of being a communist, everybody starts acting the same. So young people, the baby boomers actually, start pushing back against this. We're not yet towards the hippies, but we do see the early beat movement, and then we're going to see the one and only, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. Now, I'm going to show you a movie clip from the Elvis Presley biopic. Now, Elvis Presley comes famous for his, at the time, scandalous dance moves. Remember how scandalous the ankles and the arms of the Charleston dance of the Flappers was? This is that for the 20th century. So I'm going to show you this clip. I think the audio should play. I hope it does. But I'm not going to show you the whole thing. But hey, look, it's Tom Hanks. But, see he's wearing a very colorful suit. He's got his funky hair. He's doing his little... that is at the time, that would be like a homophobic slur.
In that moment, in a flash of lightning, I watched
really hope you get the audio from this.
Transform into a superhero.
So you see how he's moving his legs? And it's like literally the twerking of the day. No joke. I'm not even joking. That would be like considered twerking. It was like super sexual in the 1950s. And it was shocking. This was like, I can't even think of a modern artist who's as controversial. I mean, she's having a great time. So the thing with, the thing with Elvis is just that he is one of those early pioneers in pop culture, rock and roll. We talked a little bit about the jazz, like cotton clubs in the jazz age. This is kind of an evolution of that. He combines blues with like new kind of rock and roll stuff, and Elvis will become incredibly popular. Your grandparents were probably huge fans of him. You probably had some who were huge fans of Elvis. I know my grandmother was. She was a huge Elvis fan, and she was heartbroken because she was going to go see a concert with him. And then he died. He had a heart attack on the toilet the night before, which is quite common, actually, if I have a heart attack on the toilet, due to the fact that you're straining on the toilet. So it, like, harms your heart when you're an old person, or you got a heart that's not doing too well. Anywho, moving on from Elvis. Thank you very much. It sounds better in person, my Elvis impression. So, now on to the political side of the 50s. So let's talk about the Korean War. So going off of that policy of containment, America wants to contain communism in Korea. So Korea, post-World War II, I think I have a map, was split. Do I have a map? Not really. But split between North Korea, which was communist under Soviet control, and South Korea. Not a democracy. South Korea was actually a military dictatorship, but our ally until the 1980s, believe it or not. But the Northern Communists under Kim Jong-un's grandfather, which I think was Kim Il-sung? I might be wrong. That might have just been his father. In Korea, they actually do the last name first, which is why it's all Kim. And because we do first name then last name. Like if it would be in Korean, it'd be like Derogi Keeling instead of here it's Keeling Derogi. Anywho, so South Korea is defended by the United States of America and for the first time ever by the United Nations. So this is the first military conflict and the first real test for the UN, and they pass. They don't manage to destroy North Korea, but they do preserve and defend South Korea. Now, this guy, remember General Douglas MacArthur from World War II? He goes to Harry Truman, the president, and he says he wants to lay a line along the Yalu River with China because China joins the war, and we're about to win. We pushed all the way into North Korea, if you can see my cursor. China joins the war secretly, launches this surprise attack, almost destroys several American divisions, pushes all the way back down to South Korea, before eventually the war ends in a stalemate along the parallel, the armistice line, the DMZ. But what MacArthur wants to do is lay a line of salted nuclear weapons, meaning they're designed to have a lot of radiation, along the Yalu River to form a wall of radiation upon which no Chinese soldiers can cross through. And then he wants to go drop some nukes on China. He gets fired. It would not be good for the world if we did that. Shocker. So, anywho, for America, the UN is tested, they pass, we preserve South Korea. From the Soviet point of view, hey, this is the first time that we are taking active steps, especially with the Chinese, and we're pushing forward on the global stage. But it does end in a stalemate, with 1 million casualties for our allies, 2 million for the North Korea and their allies, and then 2 million civilians are dying. So 5 million casualties total. These are just some pictures from the war. These are American Marines advancing in North Korea, a very mountainous country. This is a young girl with her younger brother, refugees. So, last thing for the 50s is segregation in the early civil rights movement. Racial language and racism. My apologies. You can skip through this. So, what the heck has life been like for African Americans? Last time we really talked about them was with the end of Reconstruction. Now, if you recall Plessy v. Ferguson, that Supreme Court decision that said, yes, actually, it is constitutional to have segregation in the American South. Things have just gotten worse since then for African Americans. It's part of why we saw the Great Migration in World War I in the early 1920s. But African Americans, especially in the South, but there's still segregation all over, but especially in the South, it's terrible. Now, obviously they can't use all of the nice facilities because those are marked specifically only for white people. They are being, if we think that racism in policing today is flawed in this country, it is even worse back in the 1950s and 60s. It is awful. A lot of the sheriffs and deputies in these small southern towns, they would be members of the Ku Klux Klan. Remember with that organization that was founded. There's lynchings that are happening almost weekly in the South. A lynching is where somebody, a black man specifically in these cases, is accused of a crime. Perhaps he commits the ultimate sin in the South, which is for a black man to show any kind of interest in a white woman, and he would be attacked. Oftentimes, they'd get arrested, put in prison. The deputies would tell the local Klan members, because they knew that the deputies would go to lunch. The Klan would show up, take them out of prison, take them out to a field, beat them, torture them, then hang them, or just shoot them. So it was awful down in the South. You could not be a politician. The whole point of the Southern society that they had constructed since the end of the Civil War was to keep that social order, which they had lost during the Civil War, to keep the African Americans at the bottom rung of their society and to maintain themselves as white Americans at the very top of that society. So this is you've probably seen this photo. It's rather famous. The terms at the time, you wouldn't say black people, you'd say colored people, or they would use other terms, which I'm just not going to repeat. It's just because it's a little, I'm not going to say it. So I'm going to talk to you about Emmett Till now. There's going to be a graphic image coming up. So this picture on the left is Emmett Till. That picture on the right, that body, is also Emmett Till. Emmett Till is a 14-year-old boy visiting some family down in Mississippi. He went to the grocery store one day. The woman who owned the grocery store was Caroline Bryant. Bryant. Caroline Bryant claimed to her husband that Emmett Till had catcalled her, so to speak. Wolf whistled, if you know that term. Like he was like flirting with her, essentially. She claims. We'll get to that later. So her husband and her husband's brother get the great idea in their minds to go find this 14-year-old boy who dared to speak to his wife. They kidnapped him from his home, put him in their truck, took him out to the middle of nowhere, tortured him for hours in the middle of the night, shot him in the head, and dumped him in the river. Now, when this comes out, his body is found. That's his body. These are his parents. His parents take his body back to Chicago, where they lived, and they have an open casket funeral. They want the whole world and the whole United States to see what was done to their child. This is sadly not the end of this story. The two men who killed him were acquitted of his murder. They got off scot-free. Scot-free. An all-white jury. They faced 0 jail time. And then, because you can't be tried for the same crime twice, a couple years later, they went on a media tour admitting how, in graphic detail, they killed and tortured this 14-year-old boy. It's insane to think about. This is one of those things that was just a firebrand across the country. You're on one side or the other, and this really ignited and got people mad and fired up with the civil rights movement. Now, this is the woman who accused him. Her name is Caroline Bryant. She died 3 years ago. 3 years ago. This is not ancient history. This woman died three years ago. Now, also wanted to bring it back to her accusation. She admitted to lying about the whole thing. She wrote this book talking about how, her husband was justified, he did nothing wrong. And she admitted she made it up. She made it up. It's insane to think about. It boggles the mind. It's hard to wrap our heads around the state of the nation in the South. It's insane. But here is a quote from one of the men who killed Emmett Till and then got away with it. And he goes on to give all sorts of newspaper interviews about how he killed the young boy years later. This is one of them. I'm not going to use those words, but, well, what else could we do? He, meaning Emmett Till, was hopeless. I'm no bully. I never hurt I'm going to use the word African American in my life. I like African Americans in their place. I know how to work them. But I just decided it was time a few people got put on notice. As long as I live and can do anything about it, African Americans are going to stay in their place. African Americans ain't going to vote where I live. If they did, they'd control the government. They ain't gonna go to a school with my kids. And when a African American gets close to mentioning sex with a white woman, he's tired of living. I'm likely to kill him. This is the kind of stuff that people are getting away with in segregation South. We think it's bad. It's really, really bad. And this is the kind of stuff this guy's going around in newspapers saying years later, and there's nothing that can be done. And he doesn't die until the 90s, I believe. 90s or late 80s. But Caroline Bryant, she lived until 3 years ago, guys. It's insane. That woman died the year I graduated from UMaine. And which might be the year you guys were in 8th grade, I think. The year you were in 8th grade. Sounds about right. Bonkers. But bringing it back around, just to briefly mention the civil rights movement, which we'll go into in the 60s. So World War II kind of lays the foundation for the civil rights movement due to the fact that all of these veterans are being treated so much better in other countries than they're being treated in our country. And then all these veterans are like, hey, what the heck? Why are we expected to go fight and die for this nation, but we're not even allowed to serve in desegregated units, and then we're expected to go die? No way. So they come back home, and a lot of these veterans form the bedrock of this movement that will later become the full-fledged civil rights movement. So, last three things to mention on the 1950s. Number one is Brown v. Board of Education. This is a Supreme Court decision where they finally get it right, and they desegregate schools. This does not end, not segregation everywhere, that'll come later. However, this overturns Plessy v. Ferguson and says you cannot segregate in schools. Now, in the South, this is met with vehement hatred. People will literally pull their children out of schools when they start allowing African Americans to come into these white schools. This is going to start a term called white flight, where white people will flee urban areas now that they are desegregating, and they'll flee out into the suburbs. It's called white flight. It's part of one of the reasons why today most inner cities are mostly populated by minority groups. Because starting in the 50s, white people just fled the areas, especially in the South. They decided that the racism was enough to move. So my grandmother, actually, she grew up in Georgia. I want to say Cartersville, Georgia. Yes, Cartersville, Georgia. I'm like 99.9% sure. And her high school graduating class was the first class from her high school which was desegregated. So again, guys, this is not ancient history. You guys are younger than I am, not by a lot, but perhaps you had great grandparents or grandparents who grew up with this, depending on what part of the country they're from. But I'm assuming our grandparents are roughly the same age. My grandparents were born in the 40s, late 30s. But anywho. So this is Ruby Bridges. She's alive today. She's not even that old. She's that little girl right there being escorted into her school by United States federal marshals. Now, what's not pictured in that photo is the mob of white people who want to kill that little girl as she goes into her school. So you had to be escorted, that little girl, into the school. Otherwise, she was going to be lynched and killed by a mob of hateful people. She's still around, and Ruby Bridges becomes famous, like I said, and it says right there, she's the first African American to attend a desegregated school. And that's her today. So another big one in desegregation is Little Rock 9. This is in 57. They have to send in the National Guard, who with bayonets escort these the Little Rock 9, Little Rock, Arkansas, 9 African Americans into their school because people were not going to let them in. This becomes a national incident, and this woman right here you can probably imagine what she's saying. And again, this is an ancient history. This woman's probably in her 70s or 80s now. This woman's still alive. All of these people most of them are still alive today. This is not ancient history. Genuinely, this happened. 1957 is what? Not even 70 years ago, guys. So if this woman is, let's say she is 15, or that's a little young. Let's say she's early 20s maybe. She'd be early 90s, late 80s. Whatever it ends up being. So, I don't know. Bonkers stuff to think about. Last thing is Rosa Parks. We all know Rosa Parks. 1955, she is often seen as one of the sparks of the civil rights movement. Famously, she refuses to give up her seat on a bus where the expectation was that African Americans would go sit in the back of the bus and that white people would be able to take their seats if they needed to. She refused. In Montgomery, Alabama, she is then arrested by the police force of Montgomery, Alabama. Now, the African American community and allies of the civil rights movement in that area go on a boycott. A boycott is when you refuse to use something. They refuse to use the buses, and it actually ends up being successful. The Montgomery bus boycotts. The buses are desegregated in Montgomery. However, she is one of those early symbols, and she dies in the early 2000s, I want to say. Who's that guy right there? Who's that guy behind her? I don't know. I guess we'll have to find out next time. So that's it. Next up is going to be the 60s. We're going to see the Cold War almost go hot. We're going to see the Cuban Missile Crisis, Apollo 11, the start of the Vietnam War. We are also going to talk about the hippies, and the civil rights movement really kicks off. After that, we're on to the 70s, where the Cold War is kind of easing. We're going to talk a lot about the second wave feminism and gay liberation movements in the 70s, and disco and Star Wars. So stay tuned. Till next time. Yeah, you can see I had to look that up before we started because I had forgotten. Anywho, have a great day. I'll see you Monday.